Alright guys, what's up? It's the Ascension of Babylon. What we do here is we talk about the occult, we talk about spiritual development, and we talk about the healing process. If that's your thing and you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button, go ahead and like the video, and let's get started. So we're going to be discussing death energy and how to work with this force. I think death is something that a lot of us have been conditioned to be afraid of and have been conditioned to reject, and we've been conditioned to think that death is synonymous with evil. But the truth is, death is a part of life. There's nothing wrong with death. And powerful people are people that, whether they do this subconsciously or unconsciously or on a conscious level, are people that embrace death. Because what death actually is change. And although a lot of us know death as like physical death when we or someone else passes away, it doesn't have to be that type of change. You can go from being in a relationship to not being in a relationship. You can go from being single to being in a relationship. You can go from being addicted to smoking cigarettes to not addicted to cigarettes anymore. You can go from being broke to being rich, from rich to being broke. I mean, these are all things that involve death, because death is when one thing is being transferred to something else. So when it comes to any positive change we can possibly make, there will always have to be the presence of death energy. And this is why we want to learn to embrace death for what it actually is. And death is always going to strip us away, and it's going to dissolve us back into the source of what we are. It's going to bring us back to the roots that we have likely neglected. Death is a very necessary change that we can all embrace, or we can all resist it. And this really just depends on the person. A lot of people resist death, and this keeps them in these negative karmic cycles, because when death manifests, it's actually there to help us. It's there to support growth, but that growth is going to come after the death. We have the death cycle and we have the life cycle. Death is taking away, it's pressurizing, it's dissolving. Life is when things are coming into manifestation. And if we want those things to be more of a positive than a negative, we want to embrace the death cycle when it's actually taking place. We want to acknowledge when death is manifesting around us, and then allow ourselves to go through that death cycle in a healthy way. So maybe you're in some kind of relationship and there is conflict that starts manifesting. You start seeing sides of that person that are maybe not the healthiest. And maybe you start self-reflecting and you realize that when you got into that relationship, you were not actually being yourself. It was something that you were trying to use to escape. And maybe you were in some abusive relationship in the past that you never got to actually recover from. Now, all of that suppressed negative energy that you didn't process is showing up in the other person. And there's this sense of dying that is taking place. There's this sense of separation between you and that person. Well, you now have the opportunity to let go of a relationship that's not really aligned for you, while also self-reflecting on what even put you in that relationship experience. So this kind of self-reflection is a part of death, and so is processing the suppressed negative energies that are going to start coming up as a result of that relationship that you were in, And, once again, you're starting to see these negative personality traits and different aspects of that person, they're now showing up. And they're communications that you need to actually step back from this relationship, because this wasn't something that you were actually ever aligned with. You start to maybe realize through the catalyst that's manifesting in the relationship that this was a trauma-based relationship. It wasn't actually something that was authentic. So this is a prime example of going through a death cycle. And there can be a lot of grief when it comes to this, especially when it comes to like relationships that we form with people, and realizing that those weren't actually aligned relationships for us. So there is an ego dissolution that takes place when we come to these types of realizations. And when we do come to these types of realizations, there is always going to be the presence of death, because that death energy is now shifting us. Remember, death is change. So that death energy is shifting us, and it's pulling us into this cycle where we get an opportunity to process the suppressed negative energies and emotions that even drove us to be in the relationship in the first place, so we can actually break out of these negative karmic cycles to where we keep attracting people that aren't necessarily in alignment with the kinds of relationships that our soul actually truly desires to experience. And of course, there's many different examples as well. I was just using that, but there's many different examples that I could give you as to how death energy actually manifests. But anytime that you've been through a mental, an emotional, or a physical shift, this was the presence of death energy. And there are different levels to how death energy can manifest as well. In the occult, we call this the death current. And I want you to think of the death current as being like the way water manifests here on Earth. So what I mean by that is we have like a stream, which is much smaller than bigger bodies of water. Maybe that stream empties out or connects to a river. That river connects to a lake. A lake connects to an ocean. And then, oceans connect to like other oceans. I believe there's a point where they like mix to like an extent, all these larger bodies of water. But the point is this is what the death current is actually like. All human beings, even when they're in resistance to it, experience death. It is just a part of the reality we exist in. It's a part of the physical experience, and it's a part of what all life in the cosmos goes through, because paradoxically, what it means to live and in order to live also implies that there has to be death. There has to be that opposite polarity, giving all life the ability to actually evolve. If there is no death, life wouldn't be life. There would be stagnation, and there would be no evolution taking place whatsoever. So death is that energy of change. It is something going from one state to another. Now, when we're getting into working with death consciously, this is where things can get amped up a little bit. This is when maybe we start getting into things like the occult. There are people that work with death through the medium of working with different entities or different spirits that are personifications of the death current. Some people meditate with these forces. Some people worship these forces. Some people do different occult rituals and invocation practices, calling that energy into the body. And what this actually does is it opens up the person to a much deeper evolutionary process where they go from working with the stream to moving into the river empties out into a lake, and then eventually they experience the ocean. These currents of death energy get heavier and vaster as we work with it, and we also increase our capacity to pull that death energy into our body. Because although all humans experience death energy, once again, it's a part of life, not everyone has the capacity to work with death energy to the deeper degree that some of us actually have a natural soul resonance with connecting with. And this is usually going to be people that get into the deeper levels and the deeper layers of occultism. An example of this is working with the tree of death. The tree of death, also known as the Qliphoth, is leading you in to the death current. And as you work with each sphere, you cross the abyss, you get to the top of the tree, and then there's even a deeper process that unfolds after that. This is experiencing the death current in the way that I was just kind of explaining. You know, you're starting small, you're building a capacity, but then eventually you are swimming in the ocean. And the more death energy that comes into your life, the more surrender that is actually required to work with this force. The more letting go is going to have to take place to alchemize this energy in a healthy way. And what we're letting go of is we're letting go of attachments, we're letting go of addictions, we're letting go of identifying with identities that aren't necessarily in alignment with how our soul wants to experience itself. We're letting go of belief systems that are associated with those more, let's just call them negative identities. And eventually we're getting to a space where we're letting go of everything that we are not, so we can embrace everything that we are at our core primal root. And what we are at our core primal root is pure presence existing in the present moment. And we actually transcend polarity at this point, meaning we're not positive, we're not negative, we just are. We're actually the observer of those polarized states. And I'm not saying that those states don't exist or we don't experience them anymore, but the key words or the key word is experience them. We know that we experience polarity, both positive and negative, but we're able to actually experience those polarities in a way that is much more detached. So when it comes to positive experiences, that's great. We enjoy them and we appreciate those experiences as they're, taking place in our reality. But we're not hanging on to that positive for dear life because we're afraid of when, things swing the other way into the negative. So we're not in resistance to the negative and therefore clinging on to the positive. We enjoy it while it takes place. But then when it's time to swing into the negative, we will allow ourselves to go into those uncomfortable states. We won't over-attach to them. We don't hold on to those either. We allow ourselves to experience those negative mental, emotional, and energetic states. But we're also experiencing that from a more neutral, detached space. We know we're not the positive experiences and we know we're not the negative experiences. We are simply pure presence, equally willing to experience both of those polarities. So this is the state of being that death brings you into through this stripping away process that's going to take place. And when we're working with death, it can be very uncomfortable because there's going to be these unintegrated aspects of our shadow that are coming to the surface at the same time. So by unintegrated aspects of the shadow, I mean parts of us that are holding on to trauma that we've inherited intergenerationally and trauma that we've, let's just say, acquired in our early childhood years that we didn't process. So now these parts are carrying that energetic resonance. And with this as well, there's going to be protective layering that we created, acting as like a dam inside of us to separate us from what all of those parts were really feeling, or the energetic resonance that they were in. In other words, we were living in a disassociated state, and death starts dissolving those barriers, or that dam of disassociation, which actually takes the form of different identities and belief systems and unhealthy coping and things of that nature. And it brings us into those shadow aspects of self that are carrying those heavy or those dense energies. And this gives us the ability to process them, because we can't move into that neutral state if we don't allow ourselves to process the negative. And the negative is what a lot of us have been running away from for most of our lives. So when we start embracing death in a conscious way, it can be very uncomfortable in the beginning, because we're wired to actually avoid the discomfort of those emotions, and we're wired to exist in certain identities that are meant to keep us away from those emotions, the very identities that that death energy is going to start pressurizing and is going to start dissolving away, so we can return to our source, so we can return to stillness, so we can return to that neutral state that, yes, is willing to experience both negative and positive, but we know we're that neutral primal observer, and we know we're not negative and we're not positive, we just are, if that makes sense. So death returns us to this very primal state, but there's an entire evolutionary process that is going to unfold that is directly connected to deeper shadow integration. The more death energy that we experience and we learn to alchemize within our energetic field, and even in our body, the deeper and deeper and deeper we're actually going to go into this shadow integration process that I was referring to. Now, when I say shadow integration, I think most people only think trauma. And yes, trauma integration is a big part of working with the death current, but it's also not only that. Within the shadow is raw, untapped potential that is also going to come to the surface as we're dissolving the layers that we created over that potential. And as well, it's going to be these more primal, animalistic parts of us that we've learned to reject and that we've learned to disown, and that we were likely taught are not safe to actually embody. So a part of working with the death current is also integrating the more animalistic, primal parts of our being as well. It's not just about integrating trauma, although this is a big part of it. And in fact, you cannot successfully work with death if you're not actually willing to integrate the parts of your shadow that are associated with that trauma-based energetic resonance. So the death current is a very vast current of energy. It's a current of change, and it takes one thing and it turns it into another thing. So you are that one thing that is going to get shifted into something else, and this is going to happen many times. The deeper that you go into the death current, the more you understand that nature itself, or reality itself, or evolution itself is not this thing that is static, and there's no end game. There's no end goal. There is just continually embracing the cycles of life and death. And the more you embrace death, the more you are able to actually embrace life in an authentic way to where you're experiencing more of what you are. And you're able to actually embody more of a present moment state of awareness, and this is what most humans actually lack. Imagine yourself existing on like a spectrum, and all of you is actually existing in the present, yet we're very conditioned to be stuck in the past, or we're very conditioned to, plan and, go into the future or think about the future, but all of us is actually in the present moment. All aspects of us are able to be integrated if we're able to be present, because all of those aspects exist on a spectrum in the present moment. The present moment is a doorway to our divinity, and the more we actually allow death to kind of dissolve us away, the more of that divinity we're able to access in the present moment, because death brings you into that present moment state of awareness. It strips away the protective mechanisms, it strips away the attachments, and it strips away anything that is keeping you from actually embodying that present moment state of awareness where all of you is actually existing. Now, death energy and the underworld go hand in hand, and this connects to what I said about shadow integration. So if you look at a lot of ancient mythologies and things of that nature, you'll see that there's this concept of certain gods or goddesses and even human beings that go into the underworld, and they kind of go through this dying process. So what I'm saying is we can see the symbolism of death in these different mythologies. A more modern one would be the story of Jesus. Jesus Christ, he goes through all of these trials and tribulations. He is said to get nailed to a cross. He descends, or first, of course, he dies. So that's the concept of death right there. He descends into the underworld, and then he raises from the dead or something like that. And there are many, many stories that are much older that are actually very similar, because ancient civilizations, our ancestors understood the importance of death, and they understood the importance of honoring death by embracing these different death cycles that even if you're not an occultist, even if you don't work with it in the way that I was kind of describing, are going to come into your life regardless, when on a deeper soul level you are needing to better know yourself, and you're needing to let go of the layers that you built over what you actually are. Death is the dissolving of those layers, so you can be true to who and what you really are. But to alchemize a death cycle, to process a death cycle, it requires letting go. It requires the intention to be present, especially with what you're feeling, because when you're going into a death cycle, you're going to start feeling the energetic resonance of different suppressed, rejected parts of you that death cycle is giving you the ability to bring to the surface and integrate. It requires that you're okay with going into states of self-reflection, and it requires stillness, which of course goes hand in hand with the present moment state of awareness that I was speaking about. So this is what I wanted to say about death. This wasn't meant to be a super long video, but I'm going to be making more content on the death current, and I'm going to be going much more in depth about death over time. But until I do that, I'll catch you in the next video. Thank you for being here.